there was that question on how do you know someone is doing it? Like, how do they have to sign up? Because how do we find out?
Number one, any rental of a property, whether it be short-term or long-term, is required by the city to have a valid residential rental license. And with that license is a fee, and the property must be inspected to ensure safety. So when people apply, we know. If they don't apply, Ms. Schaaf, you're absolutely right, we may not know. And so the way we do it with long-term rental is if we see for rent signs or we become aware of properties being rented that are not possessing a rental license, we send them a letter telling them that they must immediately obtain it. If they do not, they would be cited for violating the ordinance. The provisions would be the same for short-term rentals. It's probably a little bit easier to catch because short-term rentals are predominantly through right now, this may change, but two companies, Airbnb and VRBO. And so we would be able to monitor those sites, see what properties are being listed in the city of Erie, and ensure that those properties have proper residential licenses.
That was my question, Ed. Who's the who that's going to do that? That's what I was talking about, regulation. I know
well, in terms of processing it, anybody that submits an application, it would be done through the same processing mechanism that we have now. With regard to who would catch it or who would police it, that would ultimately be done by code.
Do we have a list now of the Airbnbs in the city of Erie?
I don't know that. I'm not aware of a list of any existing Airbnbs. I know that I'm aware that people in City Hall have printed out listings that they have found, but I don't know that the city has a master list. The question right now is, are we going to allow it or not? If we allow it by this mechanism through this ordinance, then I would think, Mr. Brzezinski, we would need to have a list, and we would need to periodically check up on the listings on those sites to make sure that they match our list. And if there's something different, then we should make sure that we enforce it. And again, it's not just hey, we're trying to grab a fee to make sure these people are registered so we can get money. The purpose of the fee and the purpose of the registration is to ensure safety. So we need to have these properties inspected if people are going to be living in them, whether it be for one day or for 5 years. So we should be having a list, and we should monitor that list periodically.
Ed, Betsa, could you just really, in a really, like, I don't know, maybe 2 sentences, just explain how we got here? Because I think there was also misinformation, or at least a misunderstanding, when somebody spoke at City Council last week saying, you know, oh, you're illegal. That slice of life decision was that if you don't specifically allow it, you can't allow it. Am I correct at that? Is that if you don't specifically approve something, you can't do it? But it made it sound like we were like flagrantly violating something, and we've been waiting to put this on the books so that Slice of Life didn't say you can't have short-term rentals in Pennsylvania. It said if you're going to have them, you must formally approve them. Am I saying that correctly?
I think that's right. Historically, zoning ordinances or any type of a regulatory ordinance that addresses your ability to use your land, unless it is prohibited, you can do it. So I can use my land for whatever I want unless there's a law that says I can't. The Supreme Court changed that out of concern for preservation of residential properties and said if you don't specifically approve or allow short-term rentals in a residential district, then they're not allowed. So So right now, we have not specifically allowed them. So I think when people say, well, it's illegal, you can't have them. Right now, I think that is an accurate reading of the Supreme Court statute or Supreme Court interpretation and decision. And I think what it's telling us to do is decide whether or not you want them or you don't want them and put it in your ordinance so that we're not left to try to interpret what you meant to say or what you wanted. If you want them to be permitted, do an ordinance permitting them. If you want them to be prohibited, do an ordinance to prohibit them. This ordinance would allow them in every residential type district that we have, but they would be restricted to a special exception use in the R1 and R1A districts, which would mean that their approvals would not be automatic. They would go before the zoning hearing board to ensure that they meet the criteria, in essence, to ensure the protection of the neighborhood.
They're already operating though. That's what I'm saying. That's why the regulation thing is what stopped me from moving forward on this. We're gonna hope that somebody in City Hall who's not working, of course, none of you guys do anything all day, right? So you'd have extra time to go and search for these buildings. We know the big problem was in Glenwood. There's more than a few up in Glenwood now, and we don't know about the rest of them.
Hi Ed, it's Kathy Rosdick, I'm here.
There you are. I was looking up there, Kath, I'm sorry. Well, come on up
Well,
here with
both
us.
Eds, so I can come, I'll come up, but since I'm standing here and hopefully you can hear me, I just want you to know that most of the short-term rentals that we know exist are already registered in our rental program and inspected. And if they're not, we need to know that they exist. I mean, it's not a perfect system. There's probably rentals out there that we haven't caught, someone hasn't caught, but most of the short-term rentals and also the long-term rentals are registered and inspected. Now, what this will do, of course, and as Ed has pointed out, in the areas like Glenwood, they will now have to go through a special approval process, and they will have to go through the zoning hearing board and get city council approval. So there will be a heightened level of scrutiny on the ones that are in just the single-family zoning district. So that's really the change. Now, like I said, if there are ones out there that are not already registered, we need to get them registered. That's the same with short-term or long-term rentals that exist in the city today.
Right.
Do we have a updated number, Kathy? Because before, we didn't have a clue how many short-term rentals there were out there
I don't
when
believe,
that question was brought up. So-
right.
Okay.
So we wouldn't differentiate the two. If they're registered rentals, they're registered rentals. So now we have to differentiate the two in those two areas, the few areas, the zoning districts that are just single family, and get those, they would have to go through special approval or they will not be permitted to continue. So those are the areas we would now have to focus on. Does that make sense? Hopefully that answers your question.
That helps.
There's more steps.
Did
involved.
you receive any additional short-term rental applications per se since 6 months, a year ago when this was starting to?
Not that I know of, but I don't know that they would have distinguished. I mean, if they brought it up, we would have held off on.
Who is
on
responsible
approving.
for that now?
For what?
In City Hall, who's responsible for having that list?
The rental registration program is in the Bureau of Code.
Okay.
So rental registration is the same, whether we're talking about long-term or short-term. So it's all one and the same. The zoning approval they'll now need to get a zoning approval for the ones that are located in the single-family districts. So that will take a little time to process.
The ones that are already up and alive and working are gonna
Yes.
have to cease and desist until we okay it?
That's correct.
Do we have that mechanism in place to go out there and okay it?
Yes, that already exists within your current zoning ordinance to get special exception approval. That's already exists. So how much pain we're gonna have to go through, I'm not sure. But I know I live in Glenwood, I know the residents in Glenwood, and I bet you everyone knows exactly where the short-term rentals are and will be knocking on our door once this is approved. And I'm sure in the other areas
That's
they'll be
why
identifying
regulation is
ones.
so important to me.
Yes.
We
Can,
said-
if I could, it'll be conditional use if we pass it then? So it'd be just like the waterfront district, we could attach, amendments to it or make them do certain things, or we could deny it. Just
You could deny it.
Not we, but the planning
Go
commission.
ahead, Ed, go ahead, sorry, I'll let Ed speak to that. Ed,
So there's four categories of use: a permitted use, a prohibited use. Those are pretty clear. Permitted, I can do it. If it's prohibited, then I can't. And we have several districts that are permitted uses: R2, R3, RLB, C1, C2, C3, C4. So if I want to do it and I'm in those districts, I just have at it and do it.
Yeah.
If I am in the waterfront, and Mr. Brennan pointed out, that is a conditional use approval, that would be able to be denied if it doesn't fit, if it doesn't work, or more likely you can attach conditions to ensure the protection of a neighborhood or public safety. Distinct from that is a fourth category, which is special exception. Special exception is not special and it's not an exception. It is if you meet the list of the criteria that are in the ordinance, and we have 6 of them, then you are permitted to do it, but the zoning hearing board can attach any other necessary conditions to ensure safety or the protection of the neighborhood. It is conceivable that it could be denied, but typically what you would see with a conditional use or a special exception is that you may have additional conditions attached to ensure the protection of a neighborhood or safety.
Thank you.
How long do you think the process would take? Now, if they're up and running, we know that. Erie's a small town, and I bumped into 2 people that are up on Gordon Lane, which is one of our newer ones up there. And they're having a great time.
It would be up and running immediately.
Without going through zoning?
That's what he's,
They're
no,
saying,
he's saying the process.
You still have to go through the process.
You still have to go through
they
the
can,
process.
I think, can I, Ed?
Sure.
I think what he's trying to say is there gonna be any type of grandfathering in of those who are already, in operation?
No.
so they would have to tell people that have made their plans to come to these Airbnbs that they can't come here until they go through our zoning board hearings, which could take, what, a month? 2 months?
Conceivably, go ahead.
I mean,
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
That's not my decision, the enforcement decision. I mean, we've been operating without rigidly enforcing it right now in terms of not knowing is it going to be permitted or not. And so I think if the way I would view it is that if you're going to pass the ordinance, you pick a deadline of when people have to be, approved before they can move forward. Technically, I mean, if you're renting and you don't have a license, you're in violation. You can't get the license until, if you're an R1 or R1A, until you have the permit, or I'm sorry, the special exception approval. It would take about a month to get that.
Can we add that to the ordinance if we're gonna vote on it, next Wednesday?
Add what to the ordinance?
What you just said about the, cease and desist or,
Or suspense date?
these people, they don't wait and then just have somebody coming today. If somebody's leaving at 10 o'clock in the morning Saturday, they have a cleaning outfit there, and at 3 o'clock, the next group is moving in. So you're gonna have these people who have Airbnbs and wanna be legal, are gonna come down here and then be told that you have to cancel for the next month or 6 weeks until we go through this process. Can we have a clause in there? I'm just looking both sides of the coin here.
No, I get it. I think the easy fix to that is that if council's going to vote on it, the last section of the ordinance, section 3, as it's drafted right now, says the ordinance becomes effective 20 days after final passage and approval by the mayor. What you may be proposing, Mr. Brzezinski, would be a longer time period before it becomes effective. So if council were inclined to say, I love the ordinance, but I don't want to do it within 20 days, I would be fine with you saying 30 days or 40 days or 50, 60. You could pick the number, but once that, under that scenario, once that day comes, now it's game on, you have to be in compliance. So you could certainly make the ordinance effective at a delayed time that would give people permission or the opportunity to go to the zoning hearing board if needed.
Council? Liz, what do you think?
I think that's a good idea.
60 days?
Probably takes
Whatever you
90
think,
to
you're,
get there.
whatever,
I'm just thinking the time period, we don't want to kill the guys up in zoning either. You know, if you're gonna have 12 outfits standing in line trying to get approved.
What would you think, Kathy?
I was
Yeah.
going to suggest 60 days, so we're able to give them notice, and what we would expect is they would come in for an application for a special use approval within 60 days, or else then we're having to do enforcement. So I would
Perfect.
suggest 60 days. We will be running into holidays, so that at least if we're getting them in process, the
Right.
zoning hearing board may not hear their case until January, but as long as they have an application in,
Then
and
you're
they're
legal,
in the
yeah.
queue, we would be fine with that.
Okay, then we
Let's
won't
do that.
have to have an
Can you add
application.
that 60 days, Edward?
And make sure amended to say that you'll have application in 60 days, because like she said, they may not
That would be our
hear.
indicator, Mr. Keys,
Right.
is we would want an application, so we would be fine with that. You don't necessarily have to spell that out in the ordinance.
Okay.
In the
Did you
60
get that in?
days, Sundays and holidays don't count anyway, so we'll be good. That gives everybody out there an even chance to be legal. If they don't take that 60-day chance, then we wall them. Simple as that. Most of those people are pretty upfront, though.
I went ahead just while I was sitting here and changed the 20 days to 60 days.
I think everybody likes that. Super.
And the beauty is if you don't, you can identify whatever time period you want at the time of the vote. Because that's so I mean, if you decide tonight, hey, I feel better with 70 days or 50 days, you could make that as a verbal amendment at the time of the meeting. But right now, the draft that will be presented to you at the meeting would be 60 days from the date of final passage.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Okay, say goodnight, Edward. We're done with this one. Are you going to stay on for stormwater?
Well, I'm staying on. I
Okay.
might not participate. Kathy Doyle's on, and if there's specific questions legal, it'll probably be her, but it's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Moving on to the second, we have the stormwater management fee situation here. Maybe a little bit out of turn, but we do have a citizen here. I think she's still here, Ms. Sunberg? Yeah. Maybe we could have her come up and, she sent us all a little letter here. But you can probably come right up to the table, this way you'll have a
I see
microphone.
your letter. I didn't get it.
Oh, you need a copy? Okay.
You want to press it so it becomes.
Yeah, make it green.
Okay. I apologize, I only have 3 extra copies, but if you want to, or you seem to have them already.
Yeah.
There are plenty of others.
I'll go make some more copies.
Well, I think there were one for every
think we're
council
good,
member
yeah.
already, and then,
Yeah, we're good.
yeah, they're good.
And we got this, right?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. Ms. Sunberg?
Oh, well, thank you, Council President Brzezinski and members of City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment and ask questions related to the proposed stormwater management fee ordinance, which is Council File Number 16,249. In theory, we are not against a stormwater management fee, we being the Erie Western Pennsylvania Port Authority. However, in practical terms, there are some areas of concern that are not addressed as currently proposed. The city storm sewers, which discharge into Presque Isle Bay, do so in part through and onto land and water lots owned by the Port Authority. After rainstorms, the port or our tenants are required to remove trash, which is discharged by the city system into Presque Isle Bay. The discharge also deposits sediment, which in turn must be dredged at a cost to the authority or our tenants. Additionally, city stormwater is also improperly discharged onto roadside ditches of the Port Authority, causing erosion and undermining the authority-owned road. These situations were documented in the Port's Bluff and Ravine study completed by Dahlkemper Landscape and Design in February 2020. Due to the reasons above, the storm sewer system is not only not an indirect benefit, but can actually be considered a detriment to the Port Authority and other properties along the bay or lakeshore. It is for these reasons that we are hopeful that the City of Erie will find a solution to build capacity to make the proper upgrades to become compliant with current code, environmental standards, as well as stormwater best management practices. However, as the executive director of an organization that owns property in the City of Erie, much of which is not serviced by the city stormwater system, I have many questions that have not been adequately answered prior to the first reading. The expectation that property owners who do not have access to a storm sewer system pay a fee to maintain an asset they cannot utilize while having to maintain their own stormwater asset is objectionable. I do not argue the payment of our fair share of impermeable land that is directly discharged into the city system. However, for properties owned by the port, as well as several other organizations and businesses who do not have city infrastructure to tie into, we are required to permit, construct, and maintain our own stormwater system. As such, there are no short, mid, or long-term costs to the city on these properties. We must maintain the system in accordance with state and local permits to ensure we meet water quality standards set forth in the Department of Environmental Protection and County Conservation District permitting process. The City of Erie provides no direct stormwater benefits to these properties, specifically the authority. The City of Meadville, which has been referenced on several occasions as a model for the ordinance, does not have any properties within its boundaries that are permitted under 25 PA Code Chapter 102 to directly discharge into a body of water as we do in the City and County of Erie. As currently written, the ordinance would result in the Port Authority and others in a similar situation paying significant fees for a stormwater system which does not directly benefit. It is the Port Authority's position, through a review by our solicitor, that the levy of a stormwater fee based upon indirect benefit to the Port Authority's properties is contrary to the third-class city code. As a result, the Port Authority opposes the adoption of this ordinance as currently written. Through discussion with Public Works, I have learned that the credits will become available through an appeal process. However, the metrics and range of relief have yet to be identified. It is vitally important that these be created and explained prior to City Council taking a second vote. For property owners who are required to permit, construct, and maintain their own system, any credit should completely eliminate, not just reduce the fee. The devil is in these details. In addition, what factors will be considered in determining what is impervious? Again, I'm unaware of guidelines or policies that define the type of assets which will be used to create the square footage for impervious area on any property. Will the required public access that we provide or the substantial bike ped system be included in the calculation of impermeable area? Will our roadways be included? All of these have been constructed for the mobility by the general public, by both vehicle and pedestrian cyclists, similar to other assets kind of up the hill in the town. I can only assume that homeowners will not be charged for their sidewalks as they fall within the city's right-of-way. Also included in the city right-of-way is obviously the roadway system. While sidewalks and roadways are public assets used by all for differing modes of transportation, they are also impervious areas. If similar port assets are to be included in the calculation of impervious area, does the City of Erie intend, as is my understanding that the City of Meadville does, to pay itself a stormwater fee out of the general fund based upon city-owned impervious areas of roads, sidewalks, pathways? For all of the concerns mentioned above, we respectfully request that the ordinance be modified to further explain and allow for the execution in a fair and equitable way. Should, for whatever reason, a second reading be required to occur prior to the policies being created, understood, and agreed upon, I would respectfully request that language be added to the current ordinance to consider impermeable lands that do not or cannot connect to the city storm sewer system be considered permeable for the purposes of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amber. Any questions for Brenda?
My first question is, you say for the properties owned by the port as well as several, who do not have city infrastructure to tie into, we are required to permit, construct, and maintain our own stormwater system. Right. Could you explain the history of that? And I'm also wondering is that a similar situation in the other port authorities in Pennsylvania?
It's not a Port Authority issue. I quoted there 25 PA Chapter Code 102. That's a state chapter, and there are others in the audience that may have more, he's an engineer, that may have a little bit more knowledge on that. But what it does is it allows for us to direct discharge into the bay or the body of water, so the lake or the bay. So anyone who is immediately adjacent to the water's edge and does not have stormwater systems as provided by the city of Erie will then...
That's what I'm trying to find out is why, if someone could explain that to me. It states here that you are, that you were required to permit, construct, and maintain your own stormwater system. So my question is,
Why?
why?
That is, honestly, that is because the city doesn't have assets for us to tie into down there. And so as such, if we are to do any development, we need to then take care of the stormwater on our own. So we've had to, and other properties down on the waterfront, and even some that are up on the bluff, like SB3, have had to create their own stormwater system that directly discharges into the water because they don't have another option.
Okay, and you do know that, I mean, this was discussed in our, it just strikes me that the port might have been aware of this before we passed the first ordinance. Have you talked about this in executive session before we passed this ordinance? Because this shouldn't have been a surprise.
Well, actually, we did bring it to the attention of the administration, and honestly, I didn't learn that it was going up for vote until less than a week prior to, so I didn't know that it was going.
But you know that we have been, I mean, that this was recommended in our, the PFM report, so,
Yes.
and you know that Mill Creek's been talking about,
Yep.
so it's not like it was a topic that just dropped into your lap.
No, I agree with that. However,
I can take credit for that.
I was
though.
gonna,
If I may, one
Well,
second.
can Brenda finish talking first?
Well, I'm just gonna tell Brenda what happened with this. The administration came to me and said, if we can pass this, we would like to pass it the first meeting in November. So I said, well, we'll put it on the agenda, it's only the first reading, and then we're here now to find out the rest.
What my
maybe-
point is that
Okay.
even though it may have been a surprise to be on our agenda, it shouldn't have been a surprise to city council or to anybody who's been paying attention to stormwater management in any regard for many years. So-
yeah, I will say it certainly was not a surprise. However, you know, we had been having conversations with the administration and had not seen anything in writing until several days before you took your first reading.
And did you attend we did have a study session in June with Wood Consultants. Did anybody from the Port Authority listen then? I mean, so this was a topic months ago before we got the ordinance. Did anybody from the Port Authority attend that study session or communicate in any way when we had the original study session? I'm just trying to establish a timeline.
I don't even know if they were invited.
No,
Well, I mean,
can I
it's a
comment?
can I finish speaking?
Well,
It was a public meeting.
This is
We-
public.
right,
We had a study
So-
session. This is,
but I was
don't
gonna say-
interrupt me.
it was in
We
there.
had a study session in June. That was one I actually had to attend by Zoom because I was out of town. We got this. So, City of Erie Stormwater User Fee Study, June 24th. I guess what I'm saying is that I don't like the idea that all of a sudden the solicitor from the Port Authority is irked that you didn't know what was coming. It was here. So even though we didn't get the ordinance till, the first reading, this shouldn't have been a surprise, is my point. I don't want to argue about it. It should not have been a surprise to City Council. Should not have been a surprise to the public. It was a public meeting. We had this long report. I read every word, and I read it again, and I watched the study session.
So if I can comment, first of all, I learned in our prior sessions, it did come up about different businesses having their own, not using the storm and having direct permitting into the lake. It came up during the PennDOT discussions. And so we were aware that certain businesses down there does have direct access to putting things, into the water. And so, and they're not alone. I work for a company that has its own waste treatment plant and has permitting, that directly discharges, so, or doesn't this, but we have direct outflow that we manage, for where our stormwater goes. So the question is, okay, you don't use the storm water system, so would the port be amendable to, I don't know, some other kind of user fee to offset the fact that, they don't use it? It's just something that I'm throwing out there, that, just as a support to the city, if there's a way that you can support the city on this without being mandated, because you obviously do not use the stormwater system.
John?
I think it would be helpful if we followed the agenda and let Public Works present, and then went through, we have our guest speakers here. We have Elizabeth from Wood Consulting. We have Tim Bruno from the Department of Environmental Protection. We have Andy Walker from Meadville. And I think we could shed some light on some of these things.
We have John with his hand up too, Rennie.
Yeah, let's after John go to
if I can briefly say, if now, Renee, now might be a good time for Elizabeth to mention her comments about, it's not merely a fact that you're connected or you're not connected to our system, right? There's a lot more to it, that why we feel the fee is justified. So Elizabeth, are you on right now? Is Elizabeth on the call?
She is on, yeah, she's unmuting.
Yes, I am, I'm here.
If Elizabeth, could you comment on when we spoke today about it's not merely an issue of whether they're connected to our system or not. There's a lot more to it that justifies the charge of the fee. Could you explain that as you did so eloquently this afternoon?
Sure. The history of stormwater utility and fee development for the last probably 50 years has been built on the principle that impervious area, those surfaces that interrupt the natural flow of rainwater, those things that are driveways and sidewalks and building structures and garages and tennis courts and all sorts of things that interrupt the natural flow, is the meter for allocation of stormwater costs across the community. It is not a fee that is based on discharge rates, where every property would be analyzed doing engineering algorithms to determine what the flow rates would be off of every property. It is built on the principle that impervious area is the meter, just as we use meters in public works for lots of other kinds of fees for service. It could be a container-based refuse fee. It could be the meter that is there for water, that wastewater often is a surrogate user. We have, in the industry of public works, used meters to allocate costs on a fair and equitable basis. We are not measuring a flow regime. We are recognizing that without development, without the presence of physical structures in a dense community, there would be no need for a publicly owned and operated drainage network. So the purpose of impervious area, those hardened surface calculations, are to determine a fair way to distribute the costs. Also, a part of critical policy is a credit system that recognizes that there are properties that have invested in treatment works, whether it's dealing with the velocity, the volume of the amount of discharge off their properties, or treated in the sense of improved water quality, that those investments should be recognized through a credit process that says that those systems are in place that actually are an avoided public cost. Without those private investments, the cost of operations for a public system is likely to grow even higher over time. So there are processes in place in the industry to recognize where those investments have occurred and to give fair value credit for the investments that are made. I will also say that it is not the norm and rarely ever adopted that a credit would give you 100% relief. And the purpose is that, in fact, every property within the city is receiving a benefit from the public investment that's made in the stormwater system, either by the protection of the natural environment in compliance with things like the discharge permits the city has to hold, or whether it's actually to provide a safety and protective net for all property, physical, real property, public health, and protection of individuals. And so everyone is asked to share in the cost. And it's through the user fee process that the city is considering the methodology for doing that.
And I would think to that point, if you look at the letter once again, you will see that we're not against the stormwater ordinance. We're not against the stormwater fee. The fact, to your point, that, we don't have the information to make an educated decision on how to take a stand because we don't have the credits. We don't know what that's going to look like. So absent of that, I can only assume that we are going to be feed for a service that we can't take advantage of. And so my request was, in this letter, was let's flush all of those out so we all have an understanding of what that looks like before we go ahead with a second vote. And in lieu of that, then we're requesting that I can't take it on good faith that the credit system is going to work for the Port Authority and others that are in the same situation. So in lieu of that, if we need to pass it quickly, I've requested to have that language added that would basically give us a credit through the ordinance instead of through an appeal process.
Why can you not take it on good faith?
That would be irresponsible of me as an executive of an organization.
Who is the solicitor for the Port Authority?
Attorney Tim Sennett from the Knox firm.
Okay, and how often did you meet in executive session to talk about this?
I don't think we have, to be honest with you.
And have you talked about it at a public Port Authority meeting?
No, I anticipate tomorrow we will do that.
And will that be open to the public, or is that going to be an executive session?
That will be open to the public.
What about the response? So everyone is asked to share the cost. Aren't we going to get into a philosophical dispute here?
We may. It depends on at what level you're asking me to share the cost. What's reasonable? If you're telling me that a credit is going to get me to 50% of what somebody who actively uses the system, I might not agree with that. The board of directors may not agree with that. Others in similar situations may not agree with that. So again, not knowing what that credit system looks like, I can't support the ordinance as it's currently stands.
In the Port Authority's mission statement, do you reference protecting the bay and our water system? And what do you say about environmental protection in the Port Authority's mission statement or charge?
Absolutely. We have done a lot of projects to facilitate environmental protection of our bay. Cascade Creek would be a great example. We've done 4 or 5 projects in Cascade Creek to protect erosion and sediment from meeting and getting into Presque Isle Bay.
So why does, I guess my concern is that already the gauntlet has been thrown, like this is going to be a fight or you're going to go to court or something, where I agree with our consultant that there is a benefit overall to our community.
And I don't disagree. We're not fighting on that fact whatsoever. We are supportive of finding a way, and I articulated why, that there are issues with the city storm sewer system that discharges onto our property that we have to then take care of, because the city storm sewer system in cases is aged enough that it doesn't have best management practices associated with it. So we have to clean up the garbage. We have to, that discharges. On a rough rainstorm, it'll blow one of our manhole covers right off of a city storm sewer system.
So can I ask our consultant, Elizabeth, have you seen ordinances where the specifics are spelled out? My fear is that we're going to have a bunch of special interests coming in here and wanting us to amend this ordinance so that they're going to try and get to that 100% credit. Do you have experience, or I think Kathy Doyle is our legal person on this? I mean, is our ordinance like a typical ordinance, or what is being requested here? Have you seen this happen elsewhere?
I
think Elizabeth can address that.
Question directed to me?
Yes, I'm asking, is the ordinance that we have as presented to us a typical ordinance, or are we going to have all kinds of other property owners coming to us and asking us to write into this ordinance some kind of language so that they're seeking a 100% abatement of having to pay?
No, what you have in front of you is a typical structure for a stormwater utility ordinance. It's not at all unusual that it references that there will be made available a credit program, and that the credit program is adopted outside of the ordinance itself. I can give you recent examples. When Allentown, Pennsylvania adopted theirs, they established their program, they sent out their first bills, they began their credit program development after the first bills went out the door. It's not a unified ordinance that's typically written. The credit program is typically a policy document that's established by the authority of the elected body and can be amended over time as technology changes, as opportunities within the community change, and that the recognition of private investment is something that needs to be adjusted. So what you're doing is not uncommon.
Thank you.
Question. Does Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, do either of these two cities who are, sit on water's edges have similar ordinances? Because I'd imagine they'd have similar types of organizations along their water's edge that would have the same type of permitting as us.
Pittsburgh has been recently developing theirs. I'm not aware, I haven't checked recently to see if theirs is adopted and in place. The city of Philadelphia has had their stormwater program and ordinance in place for decades. They actually have been working on their stormwater program and amending it many times over the last 20 years as technology, as recognition of green infrastructure and different strategies have come into play. And so it's an approach, again, that should be recognizing how stormwater itself is managed as the industry changes.
I have a question. Why can't the credit program be published along with the ordinance? I understand it changes, things change, but can we have the credit program along with it, or are we following the way other cities have done it, where they've done it, the credit program afterwards? I guess I'm trying to say, figures what the advantages to doing it the way we're doing it are without having the credit program out there. And I understand it changes, it makes sense, things change, technology changes and so forth. I'm just asking the question.
Who's going to answer it? Ms. Tredd? No?
Are you talking to me?
Are you talking to me? No.
I don't mean that in a mean way. It kind of cut out a little. I mean, if the question is, could we adopt the credit program at the same time as we pass the ordinance? I think the answer is, yeah, legally you can do that. I think that the credit program has not been formalized in large part because we weren't certain whether or not City Council was going to move forward with the ordinance. But legally, if you want both at the same time, I think that you could do that. I think that your consultant has suggested that it may be a more efficient way to approve the rule and then identify the credits. But if you're leaning the other way, you certainly could do both at the same time.
Thank you. There was a guy that lived in a big white house in Washington a number of years ago. He said, trust, but verify. And I think that's where we are. We want to trust that what we're doing is the right thing, but there's so many questions out there that basically aren't really answered yet. This is a pretty big wicket to be looking at.
Mr. Zist, do we even have, I mean, how many properties would be affected that have that, that don't use our stormwater system? Do we even know? I mean, I'm
do not think
thinking,
we have a database of those properties at this point.
I mean, I don't know if it's a half a dozen or a dozen or how far.
You could probably look at a map and just delineate it with color, what's not connected to the system.
Well, we are aware that certain properties are required to have their own NIPIDs permits for discharging into the Great Lakes or the Commonwealth waters. So I would assume that in the appeals, if the stormwater fee passes, we'll continue to work with our consultants to define and establish a credit and appeals policy. But at this point, we didn't feel it was prudent to go and develop that manual without knowing whether or not council had the appetite to pass the fee.
Done.
And again, I think we're getting hung up on the fact of whether or not a user is connected to the system. The meter, as Elizabeth described, is the amount of impervious area and its negative effect on the environment. Not where the water goes, just the fact that it's running off somewhere. And through the credit process, we can reverse some of those charges that yes, they've created impervious surfaces and that runoff is a negative environment, it affects the environment negatively, right? But then if they go and establish some best management practices, oil separators, whatever, they get credits for all that. So they're being charged for creating the impervious surface, not for sending it to our system. But if they go to take measures to clean up the water generated from those impervious surfaces, then they can get some credit back. So this is a two-step process. Let's pass the ordinance and establish the fees for the impervious meter, and then we'll develop the manual that everyone can agree on for the give-backs, the credits. Did I say that okay, Elizabeth?
I had a question.
You certainly did.
And so, because I was looking at, the sizes of the properties that are considered impervious surfaces, and I just said, you know what, if I had a 4,000 square house, but anyway, but if it was on multiple, but if it was on multiple stories, it would actually have less impervious surfaces. I may only have 2,000 square feet of impervious surfaces, even though I have a 4,000 square foot house if it's on 2 stories. And I just wondered if we're gonna run into that as we implement this, like, hey, my impervious surface is only 500 and not 1,000 because, you know, my 1,000 square feet is on two levels. And so I don't know if that goes into play. And so I am for some kind of fee, but maybe I think we might crunch those numbers and do a standard fee for residential and then do a different fee for commercial. One person's
my house
opinion.
by 20 square feet.
Because I think that because that would be my claim. My claim would be, hey, I only have half the impervious surface that you say I have.
Well, what about like the Bayfront Highway and the roundabouts? Aren't the roundabouts causing a lot of impervious surfaces that weren't there before? And who's going to take care of that, plus the roadway that is being put in through the Port Authority? So we're creating a lot of impervious surfaces down there that never were there like right now, because it's definitely going to expand, and those roundabouts are going to cause a lot of runoff, right?
Anything in the public right-of-way, roadways, et cetera, highways in the public right-of-way, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're excluded from this. It's private property development. And the city has a lot of private property as well. I mean, our fire stations, et cetera, those will be included in the calculation, but it's the highway, roadway, right-of-way areas that are going to be excluded.
So we pay ourselves?
Yes.
We would, yeah, we would get a bill.
And the ordinance specifically addresses the public roadways are exempt from the fee.
Do we want to hit the agenda?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what
what.
I was going to suggest. Let's go
I
back
had
to
my
the
hand up for
agenda.
one more response to Mr. Keys.
Sure.
As far as the residential goes, I mean, there's just the $12, $24, $36, right? 3 tiers of residential. The bigger square footage costs don't come into play until you get to the other land uses. Is that correct?
2,100
So,
square feet.
and because this whole thing is based on a meter and it's of impervious and its negative impact on the environment, of course, a skyscraper is going to have less impact than a shopping mall, right?
Correct.
So you mentioned several stories. If it's a small footprint, several stories high, they are going to pay a lower fee because they have less of an impact on the environment, where a shopping mall might be acres and acres of building and pavement. They're going to have a much larger fee. But residential, the maximum fee is going to be $36, no matter how big your house is. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
No, we said the $12 fee would affect, what, 900 houses?
9,000.
9,000 houses, and bring in 115,000.
Right.
We're going to
Now-
address that in our presentation.
Okay, well, let's get back to the presentation, the way we wanted to do it then.
Okay.
Ms. Sandberg, thank you very much for your time. We'll be in touch, too. Okay, so we have Elizabeth spoke. I guess Tim Bruno's next, huh?
Well, Public Works would like to start with a small presentation and an overview and a recap.
Yeah, so we
Oh, yeah, you're all there. Okay.
yeah,
good.
we've taken the questions and comments that we've received from council over the last week and a half and tried to address it in a document and to explain some of the various questions that we've received. And we'd like to thank Tim Bruno from the PA Department of Environmental Protection. He's the chief of the Great Lakes region. And Andy Walker, the former city manager of Meadville, when they implemented their stormwater ordinance, who's now with Allegheny College. You've heard from Elizabeth, so she's going to continue to speak. But the city of Erie, we've worked with Wood Consultant, who Elizabeth is with, to develop a stormwater management program and fee structure that would enable the city of Erie to properly maintain and upgrade and rehabilitate its stormwater system. This process began in 2019, and over the past 6 months, the ordinance and plan have been developed. Stormwater management is essential to protect the city of Erie's homes and properties and communities' health and our environment. Stormwater is essentially water runoff from rain, ice, and snow. The most well-known stormwater lines and systems within the city of Erie are Mill Creek, Cascade Creek, and Garrison Run. Stormwater is unique. Some portions of the line can be seen and other portions can be a tunneled pipe. City of Erie stormwater outfalls directly to Presque Isle Bay and Lake Erie. Portion of our stormwater system were built in the late 1890s and are over 100 years old. If not controlled, stormwater can overwhelm lines and streams, causing damage, flooding, erosion, and pollution. The City of Erie is required by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection to maintain an MS4 permit, which is a requirement by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Water Act. This statute authorizes the City of Erie to discharge stormwater to the waters of the United States. The question we've gotten a lot is, what does MS4 stand for? Well, MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, and compliance to MS4 is becoming increasingly cumbersome. Guidelines, best practices, mapping, construction controls, and preventative maintenance continue to evolve and cost more money. One of the most difficult aspects of stormwater is that it happens all below our feet or underneath structures. We typically don't see it. So stormwater mostly flows out of sight and out of mind. The power of water really can only be seen when we have a catastrophic collapse occur, like we had on East 5th. Due to the increasing costs and the arduous process of compliance, the City of Erie has developed a stormwater management ordinance that contains a baseline fee structure that we believe is equitable across all users. Users include single-family homes, apartment complexes, businesses, and nonprofit organizations. All users located within the City of Erie are either directly or indirectly impacted by the overall functionality of the stormwater system. A multitude of Pennsylvania municipalities have enacted a stormwater management fee. The City of Erie has looked at the feasibility of a fee, which has been recommended for the implementation for well over a decade by a series of consultants. Most recently by Public Financial Management, PFM, through the city's 2019 Early Intervention Plan. Meadville and Allentown are two Pennsylvania municipalities that have also enacted such a fee. The City of Erie's proposed fee structure can be summarized as follows. If you are a homeowner within the City of Erie, you will fall into 3 tiers: small, medium, and large. The small tier includes 9,600 homeowners with 500 to 1,200 square foot of impervious surface who would pay $12 per year. The medium tier includes 9,900 homeowners with 1,200 to 1,550 square foot of impervious area who would pay $24 per year. The large tier includes 9,200 homeowners with more than 1,550 square feet of impervious surface who would pay $36 per year. And please note, we've received this question as well. Impervious surfaces are structures such as pavement, roofs, and parking lots that are water resistant. Now, the fee for businesses, nonprofits, and public entities will be calculated based on a number of billing units, with each billing unit equal to 2,136 square feet. To provide an example of potential cost to a business or nonprofit, we would like to provide the following examples. For example, Entity 1, if they have 200 billing units, their cost would be $4,800 per year. If there was 400 billing units, their cost would be $9,600 per year. And if they were a larger impervious surface at 800 billing units, for example, they would spend $19,200 per year. The intended budget that will be funded through the stormwater fee will be approximately $1.7 million. Approximately $350,000 of this budget will be spent on operating costs, engineer, field supervisor. Approximately $480,000 will be spent on planned capital costs, improvements, mapping, technology, outreach, and compliance. And approximately $870,000 will be kept in reserve for future priority capital projects as needed. The funding that is generated by the fee will be placed into an enterprise fund separate from the general fund. The money within this proposed enterprise fund will not be used as a transfer option to the general fund. This funding will be solely used for maintenance of our critical underground stormwater infrastructure. The objective of this fund is preventing the City of Erie's over 100-year-old deteriorating pipes from collapsing and furthering the city's MS4 compliance effort with the EPA and DEP. Continuing to be reactionary with stormwater maintenance without dedicated funding is a dangerous proposition for property owners, City of Erie infrastructure, and the local economy. It's also costlier to taxpayers in the long run, and it's not equitable. We've also received questions on why now and what about the American Rescue Plan funding. As council is aware, the City of Erie Public Works Department wishes to utilize $10.5 million of ARP funding to address immediate critical infrastructure needs. The majority of this $10.5 million will go directly to stormwater related projects. The investment of ARP money into the critical infrastructure will provide immediate relief to the City of Erie's aging stormwater system. Coupling these projects with the stormwater fee will secure the long-term funding needed to maintain a viable system for decades to come. And the availability of ARP funding will enable us to keep the stormwater fee lower. While $10.5 million is a large funding amount of money, this amount will allow us to accomplish only a fraction of the projects that is intended to provide the City of Erie the opportunity to tackle some of its long-standing issues. In addition, ARP funding must be directly spent on projects within a 4-year window, making it an unsustainable source of funding. We can use ARP funding to complete projects that needed to be completed 20 to 50 years ago, but we need to pass a stormwater management fee to create a sustainable source of funding so that we can proactively maintain our infrastructure for years to come. This strategy will allow the Stormwater Fund to establish practices, enhance compliance measures, and serve as long-term funding source. Every year, the City of Erie will be able to continue to fund capital project reserve, and this financial practice will allow the stormwater budget to have sufficient funding to pay for capital projects or repairs. The ability to match these two financial strategies will enable the City of Erie to protect property, taxpayers, and our economic viability. A properly functioning stormwater system that is able to be maintained and upgraded will enhance the quality of life for homeowners and the economic potential for the City of Erie. We look forward to continuing the discussion, and we have a few guests with us, like I said in the beginning. Tim Bruno, the Chief of the Great Lakes Region for the PADEP, is with us. And Tim, would you be able to speak to the importance of a stormwater management system?
Sure, thanks for the invitation this evening, and I congratulate City Council as well as Mayor Schember and Renee Lamus and Kathy Rosdick, as well as the Public Works Department on looking at this issue in depth. And I come to you not as a regulator this evening, but as a grantor. So I'm the project manager for the Growing Greener grant that originally made these funds available for the Erie County Planning Department to then contract with both the City of Erie and Mill Creek Township to conduct these feasibility studies. And so when you look at the water resources inside of Pennsylvania's Lake Erie Basin, probably of the utmost importance is Presque Isle Bay. We have 5 million people now who visit Presque Isle State Park on an annual basis. We have hundreds of millions of dollars in development that are located down on the bayfront now. It is not a back door, it is now our front doorstep. It's what people come and see and they appreciate. And for those of you who are aware, the stream systems that run through the City of Erie, Mill Creek, Scott Run is I think in Mill Creek Township, Cascade Creek, those are all impaired for urban stormwater or urban stormwater types of issues, such as sediments and nutrients. And what happens when those are transported down to the bay, in case you guys didn't know, we commonly refer to how long it takes water to move through a water body as retention time. And the time it takes for water to move through Lake Erie is 2.5 years. it's the same amount of time for Presque Isle Bay to flush through its waters too. So things go down to the bay and they tend to sit there. And when you have nutrients and you have warmer waters, you have the growing conditions for harmful algal blooms. And when you have those water quality conditions, those are not conducive to a thriving waterfront that depends upon boating, recreation, and you know, that actual interface with our waterfront. And so many years ago, I was a stormwater regulator with DEP down in the Northwest Regional Office, and I also ran the Growing Greener program there. And so this grant that I'm manager over is actually my last Growing Greener grant as a legacy manager. It's probably one of the longest open Growing Greener grants still existing as of right now. It was originated back in 2013. I think it just came in the right situation and right time in which both your municipality and Mill Creek Township realize that they have a tremendous amount of infrastructure under the ground that is not currently planned for, and it has a large future funding liability in front of yourselves, one that cannot be covered by your general fund and how you currently collect tax revenues. And so the purpose of this Growing Greener grant was to help support these feasibility studies. And I support your process that you went through. What was the process? Number one, you did an asset inventory. You looked at what was underneath the ground, how old it is, how much does it cost to replace, when is it going to need replaced? And you said, based upon that, this is what we feel is going to cost us. And you realized your general fund can't pay for that. What is the more equitable and fair way to do that? And fair and equitable is the way to describe this, is that everyone benefits from a stormwater system inside of the city. And the stormwater system is a utility, just like your drinking water, just like your wastewater. It is part of a three-pronged stool, and it's based upon user fees. And so the way in which you can calculate the use of your storm sewers is by how much stormwater you contribute to it, and the way you calculate how much stormwater you contribute to your system is based upon impervious surfaces. And so, you know, I think what the process that you have done here is appropriate. And I'm not here to advocate for or against or petition you to adopt this ordinance, but I appreciate the thoughtful process you have gone through to get to this point for consideration. And so what you're doing here not only affects public health and safety and protection of property, but you're also assuring that in the future you're going to be installing and meeting these requirements of your MS4 permit that will reduce sediment, reduce nutrients to the Presque Isle Bay and to other Lake Erie sources that will protect you know, the public and also private revenue streams that come into the area. So with that, I'll kind of turn it back over to council.
Thank you. AJ, I got a question.
Sure.
You said this is 1.7 million that's going to come in every year?
Yes.
$1 million of it is going to go to you guys for doing the work, and 700,000 every year is going to go into the reserve?
That's the intent. And
what do we get? I can understand maybe taking that $1 million the first year to get everything established, but why is that $1 million going out every year? Are we, you know what I'm saying? Are we adding more people every?
No. Right now,
what do we do with the $1 million?
The plan.
Share it?
Absolutely. The plan would be to have a stormwater engineer that would be able to focus on project management, project development. This will save the city money. Instead of going out to pay for a private engineer to conduct a study, we would be able to have those services in-house. We would be able to have a field supervisor.
These are the type of things we have to know. That's why this is so intricate.
Okay.
So that's 300,000 for administration, is to hire more people.
So second page. So, and that's including the field supervisor that would go out on site to check the MS4 compliance, our streams, our sediments, the status of the stormwater lines. Also, that would be including operating costs of the fund. But then you would have your yearly maintenance if we were able to do relining of a section, some mapping, GIS, technology upgrades, our outreach and compliance, which is all part of the MS4. And Liz, you sent us a video that would qualify as a compliance in MS4 as public outreach, which is a requirement that we have. And,
Well, I understand. I'm just saying there's $1 million a year sitting out there with this plan.
well, and then the rest.
Then the $870,000 would be kept in reserve for the first 4 years to allow us to build up some capital for the larger projects we have to take on.
I know we're going to have them.
Once the ARP funding is no longer available.
I'm just confused about that lump sum of money
Oh,
that has to be there every year.
These projects are really, they're extremely expensive. Have you seen with East Fifth and Garrison Run? So the idea, the intent is, let's be prudent, save the money, allocate it to need-based projects. That's why utilizing the ARP funding catches us up. So we don't have to say, we can make a direct impact and then with the ARP money, and then we'll be able to also make direct impacts with the stormwater management fee, because we'll be able to save money in reserve and complete projects in a correct manner.
A question. So the people hired, will they be city employees, and will they be pension eligible city employees?
Yes,
Yes.
it would be city employees.
Did we fix the Florida Avenue situation?
The Florida Avenue situation is one of the 7 projects that we've applied for funding with the ARP money. And we're currently going to go out for an RFP for a professional engineer to design that upgrade. And to get back to Mr. Brzezinski's question, the ability to allow us to put some money in reserves puts us in a really good position. If the ARP money wasn't available this year, the Garrison Run project costs approximately $5 million. The city doesn't have the ability to pay for that. We'd have to go out typically and issue bonds for that repair.
I'm not questioning that. I just was confused with it's in my head, 1.7 million a year is coming in. 700 is going to be put aside for future problems, and we're going to play with $1 million every year. That's a lot
Right,
of
and
play.
so 300 for additional
And
staffing.
you think we'll ever catch up where, to the extent that, like you said, you have 7 main projects in the scope right now? I mean,
Okay.
That said,
I know this is a long shot. Would that fee ever go away as we're new again, and all we got to do is monitor it, or, you know what I mean?
I think you're always going to need to have a dedicated source of funding for these type of projects, because the system's going to continue to age, and we're going to continue to have to go in and make repairs.
So we're still being a little reactive in some sense, but proactive to the areas that have been an issue in the past possibly, or could be an issue a little bit in the near future.
We're always going to find projects, relining projects, some things that need to be addressed, and we need to have the funding available to address them in the appropriate manner.
Yeah, we've identified 7 major projects, but we have several hundred miles of storm sewer in the ground out in the city that's approaching 100 years old. So, I mean, to try to wrap your hands around all that, you know, it's to have a few $1 million in reserve isn't even really very much of what could
But what
happen.
goes through there is not just City of Erie stormwater. It still comes from some outlining areas.
There are some areas that contribute from Mill Creek that we have more contributors in the sanitary sewer, and there's already mechanisms in place where they're paying for that.
Yeah,
As far as
1972.
storm sewer goes, not as much. There are
But with this being a improvement to our stormwater system, are they to help with this investment? Are they obligated to help with this?
Well, Mill Creek's doing their own fee, and they're developing a program just like we're doing right here, and they're doing their own. But we do have places where they do tie it, like up, what is it, up on Post Avenue and up in there, where there's certain places that have been problems in the past that we've remedied, but there are a handful of places where outlying municipalities do tie into our system. And we've actually discussed the possibilities of going after them as a user of our system or forcing them to disconnect. And like if we're Mill Creek, it's up around I-79 south of 26th Street. They would have to disconnect from us and run their own line all the way, to some other body of water. Or pay us.
Be the smart way,
or
would be
pay us,
pay.
because they are using some of our capacity. So there's nothing in place right now with them, but we are looking at that.
I believe it should be part of a countywide effort for something like that for the municipalities that are going through our system that we're investing this kind of money into.
Well, maybe we can get assuming you're elected to county council, maybe you can push for a county-wide sewer and water authority like they have in Lycoming County. It's great to hear you speak out in favor of regionalism.
We do have a county-wide water authority to a certain extent with
a combined one, okay? But anyhow, I want to go back to Tim Bruno just for a minute. Tim, as you know, I had written stories about the economic value of the Lake Erie fishery. I know how harmful algae blooms. I mean, those are real things that people can identify with. We haven't had to shut down our water system the way Toledo did, but without getting too deep into it, can you just kind of re-emphasize the environmental aspect of this? If you had a dog and you've gone out to Presque Isle or you've looked on, the bayside, you see those signs, do not let your dog into this water because of the HABs. So could you just kind of reiterate that? Because maybe that's one way to emphasize the environmental importance of this, but also the economic importance, because we need Presque Isle Bay, we need the lake. You alluded to it.
And you're right, Councilwoman. And environmental protection and economic sustainability go hand in hand when it comes to Erie and any one of the other municipalities that border Lake Erie. But it's especially so for Erie with all the economic development and hopefully the redevelopment plans that you all have in mind for both the waterfront and downtown. And by enabling yourselves to have sustainable revenue so that you can incorporate things such as green infrastructure that help not only retain the stormwater in terms of volume and rate, but also help clean it so that when it's discharged to the bay that we don't have water quality problems there. Those all help your economic bottom line over time. And so, hopefully that kind of answers your question, Councilwoman, as to, how the economy and the environment are intertwined.
And I think, as I've talked to council earlier, not tonight, but we haven't even begun to dream or articulate what green infrastructure can do in terms of innovation and making Erie an even more attractive place for development. I mean, that's the way where I see this going eventually. So, I mean, there's just.
And can I add one more thing to that? Is that we're looking at potentially a generational federal investment in terms of infrastructure dollars as well as investments into the Great Lakes. If you all aren't familiar with this program, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is currently appropriated $330 million per year to do restoration of Great Lakes water quality, of which stormwater is a major component of that. Additionally, inside of the current bill under consideration in U.S. Congress for infrastructure, there is a placeholder for $1 billion for Great Lakes restoration and infrastructure activities. These are things that with the provided capacity that potentially this program would put into place inside the city, you could work with county and state officials to apply for those funds to help you also incorporate green infrastructure and improve your storm sewer system in addition to, you know, whatever type of revenue you would generate from ordinance. So, you know, I hope you also keep those in mind as going forward as not blocks, but opportunities that we could all work together on.
If I can comment on that, the city of Erie already has a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grant it's going to go hand in hand with our downtown streetscape, and we plan to do tree soil cells and a stormwater capture system, you know, to direct the water into the soil cells. So it's about $386,000, I believe, that EPA gave us. So that's in development right now. So yeah, you mentioned that. I just wanted to let you know we already have one.
That's fantastic, and those opportunities come up, you know, multiple times per year. You know, I've had conversations with kind of folks all over town as to, you know, how do you mix those two things together? Like the Erie Downtown Development Corp are trying to focus redevelopment monies down there. If you can match that up with grant opportunities as well as some of the infrastructure improvements that you guys are talking about to create a better space for private business to thrive, that's excellent stuff. Or where people want to be to take advantage of restaurants or public activities. Those are all wins that I think that you can generate, and this is the first step towards those.
Oh, I think we have one more person we haven't heard from. Is that correct?
You want to sit here?
Good evening. I'm Mike Sanford from Sanford Surveying, and I'm here on behalf of Scott Enterprises. And first of all, I'm going to start with, I think your fee is a great idea. I really do. I give you credit for that. But I'm just here as it relates to lakefront properties, and I just want to point out a few things. I listened to everything you folks talked about and your consultants and so forth. I just have a few things for your consideration. It's interesting, in your ordinance, your proposed ordinance, you define the term user. It's right in the ordinance. And it specifically says it's someone that's served by a public stormwater system. That's what it says. In contrast, what I'm talking about, for instance, like Mr. Scott's Hotel there, it has a direct connection to the bay. So it's a private system. It doesn't utilize any public stormwater system at all. That's what I'm here to talk about. So you defined it as user as being a public stormwater system. His is totally in contrast. It's private. So if he's not a user, he wouldn't be subject to your user fees. It's quite clear in my mind. This would, and someone, I think Mr. Bruno talked about utility. This is actually perfectly analogous to a septic system or individual water well. I'm not saying you have individual water wells and septics in the city of Erie. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, if you did, if someone had a septic system, they're not a sanitary sewer customer. You raise the rates on sanitary sewer, they don't experience those. Same with water. This is exactly what I'm talking about. If you have a private stormwater system, you're not using the public system, you shouldn't be exposed to the public fees. First of all, again, I think your fees are a good idea. This is there is a handful of properties we're talking about here. Someone asked Mr. Zisk how many properties. I would say it's extremely limited, because I'm familiar with some of the lakefront properties. They do tie into your stormwater system. The GAF pier has a public storm sewer going down Sassafras. Anything on that pier is tied into a public system. They're going to pay. Mr. Scott's property is fundamentally different. It's probably one of a handful we're talking about here. Interestingly, your city stormwater ordinance, just to let you know, because I read it before, not this ordinance, but your stormwater ordinance, it actually says per section 105, your city stormwater ordinance only applies to stormwater runoff entering the city of Erie separate storm sewer system. So that is why Mr. Scott's Hotel did not do stormwater rate and volume control, because he had a direct connection to the canal basin, to the bay. Yes, he had to do water quality. We got a permit from DEP Meadville, and we certainly did that, and I fully support water quality, but he was exempt from stormwater management per your ordinance. And likewise, he would be exempt from your user fee because he's not a defined user. And again, I mentioned only a very few properties, in my opinion, we're talking about here. And I'm a fairness guy. I mean, just in the spirit of fairness, if he's not using your system, why is he paying for it? Someone mentioned about impervious as the meter. The meter, okay, I agree, but that's when you're contributing to the system. That he's not contributing to the system. Therefore, he has impervious area, but that meter reads 0, in my personal opinion. Someone remarked this is a typical ordinance. I agree, probably is. Probably a boilerplate ordinance adopted by communities all over the state. This is an atypical situation. This is extremely unique. Again, a handful of properties we're talking about with a direct connection to the lake or the bay. That's what we're talking about. And I mean, it's your ordinance. You can do what you want, but just, I mean, to me, the ordinance is clear. Mr. Scott's property, he's not a user. He doesn't pay the fee. But yes.
While we want you to have public comment, we're not really here to be in the debate tonight. So.
Okay.
So I've asked you to just articulate the things that you would want for us to know. And
okay, well then I guess I've given those to you just to let you know what I thought about that.
Thank you.
Okay.
When I said someone else, I thought you had a person from Meadville that was here, or
Andy is on the call. We would like
we're going to give him an opportunity. We don't want to hold this too late, but we want to give everyone who took the time an opportunity to comment.
Good evening, Council. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty hearing you, so hopefully that was my invitation to speak.
It is.
So it's a pleasure to join you. So thank you, Council and Mayor Schoenberg. So I'll just give a brief rundown on Meadville's experience. Right, 2022 will be the 10th year of our billing program, having adopted a stormwater management user fee modeled very similarly of what you have in front of you here this evening. Meadville's story is no different than the city of Erie's. It's just a matter of scale. Our investment in our stormwater infrastructure, right? When it's out of sight, it's out of mind until it isn't. But it's constantly competing, right? But public works, the police, fire, public safety expenses, collective bargaining wage increases, and healthcare expenses. And so we were able to make, with extensive public input and public outreach, right? We were successful in making a fairly clear and convincing case that we weren't adequately investing in our stormwater infrastructure. And so after sort of that public outreach phase, right, we also were able to, I think, make the case that, a convincing case that the most equitable way to fund that, of course, wasn't through the general fund, which is, of course, funded by the real estate tax largely, that everyone benefits from the stormwater management system, and that the way to do that was through just the most equitable way of doing that. Nearly 45% of the city's tax base is tax exempt. We're, like you, home to great institutions, Meadville Medical Center, Allegheny College, all of our churches, but all of which are, of course, tax exempt. Our fee in Meadville is actually a bit more significant. I think we provided that information. Ours is a $90 ERU value, equivalent residential unit value for a single family detached home. We do not have a tiered system in terms of single family detached size. And really, at the time, that was really just a judgment call in terms of the investment and further evaluating and gaining that data and the ability of our small city staff to administer the program. So there is no tiered level. It's really just that flat $90 per ERU. Our fee in Meadville, and I should have qualified, right? I'm no longer with the city. I did step down as a city manager last spring in a new position at Allegheny College, but so I'm not officially representing the city, but I did speak with the city manager earlier today to let her know that I was meeting with you. The fee in Meadville generates about $800,000 annually. We did not invest initially. I mean, it certainly was a bit budgeted because we did allocate some administrative costs to the program. It was a bit general fund relieving early on, but we didn't invest in new staff right away. Really, it was an equipment, really making our existing staff as efficient as possible, right? So new stormwater, new street sweeper, new backer, new equipment that made their jobs easier. Because we were also sensitive, I think I heard a council member ask the question if there's any new employees, would they be subject to new pension, fund requirements, and of course we were sensitive to that as well in terms of looking where we might increase other expenses. We do in fact have an appeal policy for billing errors and special conditions. The billing error appeal is of course just inevitably when you bill there'll be some questionable of what's been included as impervious area, et cetera. The special conditions policy does address where there's, and as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, that where there are special conditions, where a property doesn't, in our case, where it is not just their discharge does not enter the city of Meadville at all. Like we have a few cases where it literally enters into the adjacent township based on topography. They would be eligible for a partial credit or appeal. And then, of course, we do have, as mentioned, a credit policy that addresses water quality, peak flow, and volume. I will say, however, that the credit policy, there's been very few ratepayers who have taken advantage of that historically. I could probably count on one hand, maybe two at the most, over our nearly 10 years, the number of credit applications that we've received. Only because it is a little bit, I don't want to say onerous, but it is, we do require that just for fairness and equity to other ratepayers, that anyone seeking credit can truly document how they're managing volume and water quality. And so the bar is pretty high in terms of the the application process to demonstrate the credit that they're seeking. And then I'll just also quickly say that I think you will also find, however, and be prepared for that your residents and ratepayers will hold you more accountable. They will pay more attention after you have a fee in place. They will call when they see an illicit discharge, when there is stormwater runoff from a construction site they will think is polluted, when there's infrastructure issues that's causing property damage, private property damage that they've tolerated for decades will be now less tolerable now that they're paying stormwater fee. So you should be prepared for that as well. But I will say in 10 years, it's really changed the game in providing dedicated revenue, right? For infrastructure improvements, for equipment purchases related to the stormwater program, has really provided a steady revenue to really chip away at the same problems that you're having in the city of Dearborn. So I'd be glad to, I can answer questions tonight. I know you're long. I'd even make myself available in the future if that's helpful to you as you decide to move forward with your program.
Did you include, as we have been requested tonight, to actually include the provisions on, I don't know if you would call it mitigation or credits, did you include that in the ordinance? Or if not, how long was it between the adoption of the ordinance and then the issuance of the credit policy? Is that the right term to use? Or?
Yeah, I understand your question.
Okay.
Yeah. So as Elizabeth explained earlier, we are one of those communities, and I think your solicitor said you could do them simultaneously. In our case, we did do the ordinance first and followed it by the adoption of the credit policy. I will say this followed in fairly quick order. I think we adopted about the same time of year. It was an October adoption of the ordinance. And I think certainly before we issued bills in the following January, so within the next 3 months following, council had adopted the credit policy. and the appeal process as well. So I will say that we had enough in terms of public input and sort of stakeholder advisory process and involvement that we had along the course of our program development. We had heard the concerns of our ratepayers interested in credit policy, but it did in fact follow after adoption of the ordinance.
And is the adoption of those credit policies something that require, I mean, did you use Wood consultants in that step also? Because it sounds like something that is pretty specialized, and we did have some input tonight from stakeholders. So I guess what I'm saying is I think maybe I should be asking the Public Works Director, but you'll be relying on that expertise to develop that, because we aren't going to say to Chuck, John, or you guys go home tonight and draft this, right?
No,
Yeah.
we fully intend to continue the engagement of Wood to develop the credit policy.
And that's why I was just, okay, thank you.
I have a question as a matter of clarification. It's been stated that the city of Meadville does not have any properties within its boundaries that are directly discharging to a body of water, but you're on French Creek, are you not? Do you indeed have any properties that direct discharge, or not?
We do in fact, and there is not a credit for those. And we've taken the position that our MS4 permit, regardless if they might be permitted separately for their direct discharge, technically under our MS4 permit, they are still required. I mean, the city is still required to oversee and review and be responsible for any illicit discharges that might emanate from those direct discharges. And I mean, I'd certainly rely on Elizabeth's expertise here, but we do have several cases along French Creek who have direct discharges, but arguably they still benefit at large from the overall city stormwater system, and the city's still responsible from an MS4 permit compliance perspective for those discharges.
Thank you.
And I have always one more question. I'm sorry, guys, but one of the things that really impressed me about the website for Meadville was your FAQ, but what also shone through was that regard for the health of French Creek. So I think that people in Meadville or Crawford County have the same kind of love and desire to protect French Creek that I would think we have in Erie to protect Presque Isle Bay and Lake Erie. So I just wondered if you could, if I'm reading that correctly. It just there, French Creek is historic. It's part of who you are, I think. I could be wrong.
No, in this case, you're actually also speaking to the president of the board of our French Creek Valley Conservancy, who...
Just so people know, I did not know that. I did not set you up that way. Had no knowledge of that. Sorry.
No, that's not a setup, but that happens to be the case. So I am the president of our board of our conservancy. So in fact, right, even in developing our program, I wasn't at the time, of course, but we had as one of our stakeholders on our advisory committee a member of the conservancy who was able to advocate for that, for the freshwater resource. Of course, it's the most biologically diverse stream in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're very proud of it, and we respect it. So that was definitely part of our education and outreach.
Thank you.
We're going to ask Elizabeth to go over some of the fee comparisons. You asked last time about other municipalities in Pennsylvania that had the stormwater fee and what we were proposing compared to those. So she's going to go over that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Renee. As we shared with you in June, basic overview, and I believe this slide was up on the screen a little bit ago, that gives you an immediate comparison with a number of communities that are in the state The last, most recent survey that we're aware of has about 35 to 38, there are a couple of them, I'm not sure exactly what their final status is, communities in Pennsylvania that have over the last decade adopted user fees. These are giving you a comparison on the slide of your proposed fee to others. And as you can see, your residential tiers are quite low by comparison. White Township is probably the closest to you. They don't have tiers. They're at $24 per single family detached residence. You also can see on this chart the size of the billing unit. The billing unit is that amount of impervious area that is used to calculate the number of billing units on non-single family residential properties. And you can see that even those vary considerably. And that's because each billing unit in each community establishes their billing unit based on existing conditions within their own community. It's not just pick a number. It is done after analysis of the impervious area calculations within a community. And so you can see that that does vary. The one unique one that is on this list is Allentown. Allentown charges without regard to land use. There is no separate fee that addresses single family homes. They charge $20 per year for each 500 square feet of impervious area. I think it's also important to note that Allentown is an extremely densely populated, 120,000 people in about 19 square miles. And so their average single family home is 3 billing units or $60 a year. So when you look at all of the data we have for Pennsylvania, the most current data we have, the average monthly charge is $7 per household. That multiplies out to $84 per year. So you can see that your program and the tiers that we've analyzed and developed for you have a range that taps out at $36 per year. So the amount of charge, when you do it on a comparison basis, is relatively small by comparison to other communities around the state. You can also see, if we head up, and I can get this data for you if you'd like, what the revenue generation is for these communities on an annualized basis. For Allentown, for example, I'm intimately aware of that one. I worked on that one for a couple of years, and their revenue generation is right at $6 million a year. So their rate translates into that size of revenue stream. All the difference in the rates and the revenue stream are driven by the program of services that each community has to deliver to manage their system. Whether they're permitted or not under the MPDS program, that varies as well. Philadelphia and Allentown are phase 1 permittees, so much more significant from a number of requirements permit than the phase 2 communities. Though the phase 2 communities have certainly seen significant change over the last decade of what is required within your permit, moving much closer to the kinds of controls that the original phase 1 program, the phase 1 communities were the very first ones permitted in the early 1990s. And so we're seeing the phase 2 communities shift the burden of what is required through the permit, and therefore we're also seeing the costs of their stormwater programs increase over time. But I think the chart really is self-explanatory in your understanding of what your program is and what your potential charges can be.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Sure.
Does anyone have any questions?
No one has any more questions. We'll go around the room with council if they have any ending remarks, starting with Ms. Allen.
My only suggestion would be that, you know, it sounded like if we're looking at Meadville as a model, that it would probably be advisable to have the next stage of this sooner rather than later. And I know you, especially, I think one of the good things about listening to Tim Bruno was to get the whole scope that Growing Greener grant was from 2013. So, and I think it's also important to let people know that this isn't like something that somebody pulled out of their pocket at the last minute. So I think that context was important to hear tonight. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I know best practices, there's always, you know, science continues with stormwater management and so forth, but is there a place you start out with these credits? I mean, it's not like we need to reinvent the wheel with credits. I know each community is different, but I'm sure there's kind of a standard approach to what the credits would look like, and then you customize it per our region because of our situation with the lake and so forth. I don't know if there's any thoughts on that, or if there's already a draft.
We're going to have to work with our consultant on developing that program.
Okay, so there's really nothing, no outline or anything yet?
Not yet, but we have
okay.
looked at other communities and how they administer their programs.
Okay.
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you. I know that there's a need. I've been in situations in Erie where I've been traveling in car, and like it was in the early 90s, about 24 years ago, and I was stuck in the late afternoon across on the west side, not being able to go to my home because of flash flooding situations in Erie. Another time, just about 5 falls ago, coming home, and I think there was like a tornado that had been spotted or something, and I was trying to get home, and the streets were just covered with water everywhere. And it's a very scary situation being in that time. I've had a tree fall on top of my car while driving one time in a storm. You know, things happen and you don't expect them to happen. And we do need to improve the aging infrastructure so that these flooding situations do not continue.
My comments are not directly related, but if you could outline what you're doing on the Pine Avenue site as far as stormwater that I guess is connected to the Florida Avenue site in order to mitigate the stormwater in that area of the city. Okay. What's that? Oh, wow. Mr. Witherspoon, if you can hear us, you have the floor.
I can hear you.
Yes, sir. We're pretty much wrapping up, but we want to know if you have any questions or comments, sir.
No, I don't have any questions. I think the professionals that presented Stormwater information tonight was outstanding. It cleared up a lot for me. And I appreciate it, and I'm ready to vote it up.
Okay, sir, thank you. Mr. This, you want to have the final word?
Mr. Keys and City Council, we just appreciate the opportunity to present the stormwater fee ordinance at this study session tonight.
Our clerk's not here today, so let's officially end this meeting.
Recording stopped.